Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Kim Perotti, Athletic Director at Los Gatos High School. Coach, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, well, let's dive in. Can you take us through your background as a coach? How did you end up in the profession? What were the stops along the way? And how did you get to where you are now, occupying the seat of the leader of the athletics program, coaching other coaches?
Yeah. Well, my entire career has kind of been, attached here to Los Gatos High School. I went to school here. I wrestled here. I played football here. But the coaching part probably really started all the way back when I was in high school. We had a summer wrestling camp here. And so I started as a camp counselor, coaching summer camp for wrestling. And that was kind of my first introduction into coaching. We had a really long time coach here, Scott Downs. Scott was a art teacher here, and he was the head wrestling coach for many years. He was my junior high wrestling coach. He's definitely like my mentor, all things coaching and teaching related, and really has become like a second father figure in my life. So I definitely owe a lot of what I have to him and his guidance over the years. It's been instrumental. So very, very lucky to have someone like that, to have someone you can turn to and ask questions and run ideas by and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so after wrestling, my first job as a head coach was in my senior year in high school here at Los Gatos in '99. I took over the junior high wrestling program up at CT English up on the hill. I had about 30 or 40 kids, and it was just me every day coaching wrestling, having no idea what I'm doing, essentially taking my coach's practice plans and adjusting those for junior high, and pretty much, doing everything I've learned from running camp and wrestling in high school, and kind of started coaching junior high wrestling. And the year after that, I graduated. I was going to West Valley College. I started as a JV assistant coach here at Los Gatos while I was attending West Valley. Did that for 2 years, which was great. Really, really loved coaching wrestling here. It was, being an assistant coach is the greatest job in the world, man, because you show up, maybe there's a practice plan, maybe there's not, but all the pressure's off of you. You're not having to talk to parents or answer emails or create practice plans. And as a young coach, I got to be everyone's friend, which, is nice. But ended up transferring up to Butte College and then to Chico State, where I did my undergrad. And while I was in college, I coached for like one semester at Pleasant Valley High School, coaching wrestling up there. My roommate at the time was friends with the wrestling coach and brought me in, and I helped out a little bit there, but really didn't do much coaching between that time and by the time I graduated. I came back every year to run this wrestling tournament. We have this big Frosh Sock wrestling tournament, and I've been essentially running that every single year since 2005. But after I graduated, I was kind of didn't really have a path, didn't know what I wanted to do. Certainly didn't know I wanted to be a coach or a teacher for that matter, but moved back home here to Los Gatos, trying to figure things out. Scott, my mentor, was like, well, you're back home. You don't know what you're doing. It's like, you can start subbing and you can start coaching wrestling again. And that was in 2005. So I started back coaching wrestling in 2005, and that was the year our wrestling team, we lost out to Gilroy by 10 points for the CCS championship. So that was the closest anyone's touched Gilroy in wrestling since then. That was all the way back in 2005. So that just tells you the run that those guys have been on. Being on what, it's 2022 now. So, and then after the end of that year, I was ended up taking all the sub jobs that nobody wanted, which often ended up being special ed. And so I ended up in a long-term sub position here on campus with what we used to call the ED, emotionally disturbed classroom. They kind of ran that teacher out of there. So I came in there and I pretty much coached special ed that first semester, having no idea what I'm doing.
Yep.
Second. But another assistant principal encouraged me. He's like, "Hey, you're really good at this. You should look into the intern program. Start teaching here next year." So I did. At the same time, Scott was like, "Hey, I'm stepping down. I'm retiring. I'm going into administration. And would you have interest in being a co-head coach with this other coach, Arno Dominguez, who's been around for years and years, particularly in the Santa Cruz area?" And so, yeah, I started as a first-time teacher with as an intern in 2006, and essentially the co-head varsity wrestling coach, but really in charge of doing all of the logistics, the planning, the communication part. Arno really helped with running practices, and so I had the benefit of really being a coach with him for the entire 6 years I was here. But I really got to see someone who's done it for a long time, and I got to see that firsthand every single day. And so I wasn't thrown into it completely in the dark, but yeah, started teaching special ed and at Los Gatos, and was the varsity wrestling coach. And then I've always been super organized. I have a background in business administration. That's what I majored in college. And so, it kind of lent itself well to the athletic director position. And we needed an athletic director. They're like, you're super organized. Would you have interest in doing this job? And at the time, it was also split with another long-term coach we had her on campus. And at this point, I'm trying to get tenured. So, as a coach, and this is, probably an important thing for a lot of coaches to hear, is like, you want to make yourself like completely like invaluable to whatever organization you're at. Right. And so, when someone comes and asks you to do something, particularly if you're trying to get a foothold in a school, it's like the answer needs to be yes.
100% of the time. Yes. Saturday yeah. School, no problem.
Whatever you need. You're right. And so for me, I viewed it as, first of all, there were a lot of things happening, from an athletic standpoint that I had issues with. So I saw it as an opportunity to have real change. Los Gatos up until that point was kind of quote unquote a rogue program. My football coach was the athletic director here for many years, and then our defensive coordinator took over, and they did a good job, but they did things their way, and they didn't really play nice with others. And so it was just an opportunity to help change the public perception of our school and our athletic department. And I started as AD in 7. So I was the AD here for 4 years until unfortunately I got laid off. We had declining enrollment in special ed. The AD job was just a 0.4 release, so 2 classes. And when the sped job disappeared, I really didn't have any employment. So that's when I kind of stopped coaching wrestling, was that 2010, 2011 school year. But from there, I went to Westmont and kind of had an opportunity to hit the reset button from coaching. Being a teacher going through the credential program, particularly in special ed in this district, was a lot. And then throw on athletic director and then head wrestling coach on top of it. I definitely burned myself out pretty early. I was spread pretty thin. And so when I left Los Gatos, I'm like, I'm going to try and do some things differently. I always wanted to coach football here. My football coach was asked me every year, please come and coach football. We need good people. And I'm just like, I really wish I could, but as the varsity head wrestling coach, I don't have the time to be able to do that. And so when I was kind of released from having to coach wrestling, I went to this new school and said, hey, I'm going to coach football. And a buddy of mine was the head coach. We get through spring ball and he tells me, hey, I'm stepping down. So the varsity coach at the time, Eric Buren, who ended up being a very good friend of mine, even to this day, was like, I need a JV football coach. And I'm like, well, I've never coached football in my life, man. And he's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you've been a head varsity coach, you've been an athletic director, coaching is coaching. And I think that was the first time where I realized, like, yeah, like it doesn't really matter what you're coaching. It's really about how you coach it. And I figured that out pretty quickly. Totally re-energized me as a coach, switching from wrestling to football. And for those wrestling coaches out there, they know this. Being a wrestling coach is a very lonely job. It's a very lonely job. Oftentimes, you're the only one running practice. You're the one taking the team on the road, every Friday, Saturday throughout the entire winter, missing all the holidays, missing all the family functions and everything else. And you're doing it all by yourself, And so when I jumped over to football, all of a sudden I had a staff, and I had a good staff, and I had people that were my friends, and there was always someone else there that I could talk to and bounce ideas about. And I would say, like, the biggest thing about coaching football versus coaching wrestling is just the camaraderie that you have with the other coaches. I think more than anything, if you have a good staff, that's going to keep you coaching for a long, long time, And I was lucky enough at all the places that I've coached that, I had a good staff to work with, and those other guys there every day, in addition to the kids, made it real easy to show up and give it my best effort day in and day out, So I was at Westmont for 2 years. Dave Duran, who was a coach at Palo Alto High School, football, wrestling coach, was a friend of mine. Through him, I met Earl Hansen, who was the football coach at Palo Alto. And Earl helped me actually get a job at Palo Alto High School in 2013. So I interviewed at Palo Alto. It was a big pay bump, which is kind of what I needed. I mean, I loved coaching at Westmont High School. Of all my years teaching and coaching, those 2 years I had at Westmont were probably the most rewarding. Right. Westmont was a great place because there wasn't a lot of expectations as far as what we were going to do, and the parents were just so thankful for everything that I did, and just for having an adult be there and to be working with their kids, and I was actually, like, from a special ed standpoint, like, really making a difference. Like, the kids I had were really benefiting from my help. I wasn't just working with these kids so they can get accommodations on their SAT, right? So really loved my time at Westmont, but unfortunately I wasn't making ends meet. So hopped over to Pally. I get the job. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to Palo Alto High School. I'm going to teach special ed. I'm going to coach football. And I get a call after I signed my contract from the superintendent, Kevin Skelly. And I've known Kevin over the years. Kevin was the principal at Saratoga. And just through athletic director, you just kind of got to know him a little bit. And he was like, I know you got hired at Pally, but
come back to Los Gatos.
No. Well, Kevin was the superintendent of the Palo Alto Unified School District.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Kevin is like, I need you to go to Gun. Gun needs help. So we're going to send you to Gun. You're going to coach there. You're going to teach there. And so I'm like, well, I go where you go where they tell you to go. Right, the superintendent says you're going to Gun. You're going to Gun. So that's where, as a coach, I was lucky enough to work with Dan Navarro for a year. Dan was a longtime coach in the SCVL. He was at Limbrook. He was at Mountain View. And he was at Gun the first year I got there as head coach. And, my coach here, Butch Catalico, put in a good word. And Dan was like, hey, come and coach with us. So I ended up coaching varsity linebackers and running backs at Gun that first year. We won 7-3, won the league. Didn't make the playoffs because only one team out of El Camino goes. But that was my first year kind of coaching varsity football. And it was a lot of fun. And I thought, damn, I'm a pretty good coach. Here we are. Like, we did pretty well, So Dan ends up retiring for good this time, and he moves to North or South Carolina. And another coach takes over. I go back down to be the head coach at the Frosh soft level at Gun that year too. And that's when I really figured out what kind of coach I am, because my Frosh soft squad went 0-10 that year in the El Camino division. And that was a new experience for me, because up until that point, every place I've been to and I've coached, I was lucky enough to have success and have kids that, were great athletes, And as Bill Walsh said, not always about X's and O's. You need Jimmy and Joe's too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the kids at Gun were great, but we just didn't have the horses.
Mm-hmm.
So when 0-10 as a Frosh soft coach, in year 2 there, it was pretty rough, but it really teaches you a lot about how to motivate kids, particularly when you have a season where you're not winning, you're not having a lot of success. Like, how do you show up on a Monday after you just lost a heartbreaker to Limbrook, and it's like, how do we get these kids motivated for the next game, And so, I think my growth as a coach really, really took off that year as I'm finding new ways each and every week to try and motivate these kids, send a positive message, get them focused on just improving, right?
Right.
As a coach, obviously, I've never focused on the outcome, which is winning, right? Right. Winning is the byproduct of doing everything right Monday through Thursday, right? Yep. So did that year at Gun, got tenured, but things were pretty rough, and I was really missing the competitiveness.
Right.
And so opportunity opened up at Palo Alto. I ended up transferring to Palo Alto High School, and still teaching special ed at Palo Alto, and started coaching the Frosh soft. I was the head Frosh soft coach there that first year. Had a lot of fun. It was great being back in the Deanza division, kind of competing with the A-League schools, and really taking what I knew as a coach, from Gun and from Westmont, and then, from my own time here at Los Gatos as a player, and kind of implementing a lot of those things. And year 2 at Pally, the coach at the time was Jake Hallis, and we get through spring ball of that end of that first year, and he's like, I need a varsity DC. I need you to be the DC. Mm-hmm. And like the week after that, my father passed away unexpectedly, and it was brutal, and not something that that any of us saw coming. And so I was already signed on to be the DC, and I couldn't walk away from it because there was literally no one else to do the job. Mm-hmm. And so that year in 2015 was probably my hardest year of coaching. Mm-hmm. Just I had this, weighing on me, and first time varsity DC, spending hours and hours and hours trying to figure out how to do this job. Mm-hmm. and going against the Milpitases and the Wilcoxes and the Los Gatoses of the world, it was tough, and we won 3 games that year. We made the playoffs, which was great. We ended up beating Salinas in the first round of the playoffs at Salinas, mm-hmm. On a trick play at the very end. But that was a real tough year of coaching from a personal standpoint, At the same time, my wife was going through some of her own health issues. And so there was a lot of things where like my personal life was for the first time really more important than my professional life,
Right.
So trying to find that healthy balance between my family and what I love doing, mm-hmm. which is teaching and coaching, was tough, and then I go into year 3 at Palo Alto, go back down to the Frosh soft. We get a new coaching staff. I really worked hard after Jake stepped down to bring Danny Sullivan as our varsity football coach, mm-hmm. Which was great. And, I go back down to Frosh soft and coach another year of Frosh soft. And at this point, I hadn't been an athletic director for like 5 years. I was an assistant athletic director at Pally for the 2 years, right. Really just focusing on running everything from the football operation standpoint, because like Los Gatos, Palo Alto is very similar as far as mm-hmm. How big the program was and all the various layers. Mm-hmm. But the AD job opened up at Pally, and I'm like, I went home, I talked to my wife. She was not happy. She was like, "Why do you want to do this?" And I'm like, because I really loved being an AD and being able to help other coaches and be able to fix the problems that I saw were problems. And so I interviewed for the AD job at Palo Alto in 2016, and it came down to me and Theron Wilburn. Theron's now the AD at St. Francis. Theron got the job. I didn't, which was fine. But the next day, I find out that Mark Crail here at Los Gatos was stepping down as athletic director. Someone reached out and said, hey, the LG job is opening up. You should interview. And like, I literally just got done with my interview at Palia the day prior. So I just took my application and sent it over to Los Gatos, and interviewed, and the interview went well. I had a lot of really strong emotions about coming back here, you know, mainly because of the way that it ended. When I was laid off in the 2010-11 school year, it came down to me and another good friend of mine. We were both equal on the totem pole, so to speak. And the principal at the time chose my friend over me, which was fine. I actually brought the guy in to teach with me, and then he ends up getting the job, and I end up without a job, which is just funny how the world works. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking, like, do I really want to go back there, knowing exactly what I was getting myself into? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Because this job the athletic director at this school is insane. You know, it's a pretty crazy job. But I was ready to make a move. I was tired of driving to Palo Alto every day or taking the train. I live in Campbell. So I'm like, it's going to be a closer commute. It's a job that I already know how to do, and I know how to do well. And it was a 0.6 release. So I was only going to teach 2 classes. And so I made the decision. I pulled the trigger. I came back here to Los Gatos in 2017, and pretty much picked up right where I left off as AD. A lot of the coaches that were here in 11 when I left were still here when I got back. So it was a really easy fit just to kind of slide right back into it. But I would say the biggest thing that I did when I came back here to Los Gatos was really take the time to get involved with all the different organizations that we have to support athletic directors, So, going to the CCS AD meetings, getting involved with that organization, getting on a couple of different committees, CCS, ADA, those kinds of things. Now I'm the president of the athletic directors for the SCBAL. So got to run all the league meetings and all that kind of stuff. But it has been nice, like slowly getting more and more leadership responsibilities every year. I think that's a role that I really enjoy doing. And now I'm in a place where I find myself kind of supporting other athletic directors. So being involved with these organizations and a lot of these other old timers, you probably don't like me calling them that, but really learning from them, right? I mean, I know there are books out there about how to do this job, but really there's no one right way to do this job. And so I've been lucky to surround myself with people that know what they're doing, and I try to glean as much as possible from them. And that's kind of where we've been. Continued to coach football. When I came back to Los Gatos after my first year, I coached football here at the Frost Soft as an O-line coach the last couple of years. This year, I finally been made full-time, which has been great. Although I think the biggest thing that if I had to, have a negative about being a full-time AD is that I don't have that class time, with my students every day. And I think not being around students on a daily basis is something that I didn't anticipate I was going to really struggle with, and it's been tough this year because I don't feel as connected to the students as a full-time AD, and also not coaching on top of that. But there's been a million other pluses. I mean, there's so many things I've been able to accomplish this year because I control my day, which has been nice. And I think the biggest thing for all the coaches out there that are also special ed teachers is no more IEPs, because those things are really time sucks from your day, both emotionally, and physically. And so I think the biggest thing is just being able to manage my day from start to end each and every day, figure out knowing exactly what I have to do that day, and knowing that there's not going to be any kind of thing that's going to kind of, drop in my lap and explode my plan for the day,
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, this is year 16, first year not teaching students, but, coaching is still a big part of what I do. But I am in a role now where I kind of coach the coaches, which has been great,
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Excited to talk about that. So I want to focus on this episode more about your role as an athletic director than your role as a coach. I mean, obviously it's going to overlap, but due to your experience at multiple campuses and the fact that you're now finally a full-time AD, what I really want to do is give some agency to other ADs that are listening, but also frame for the coaches that tune in on a weekly basis. What are the things that, from an administrative hat, you look for in coaches? What are the challenges that you have seen? What solutions can you present so that coaches that are scrambling, trying to figure some things out, it's like, hey, look, Ken's done this for 16 years, and here's some low-hanging fruit that are general enough to help everyone. So in that, what I am most curious about right now is you were away for however many 8 years, if my math is right, before you came back to Los Gatos. And in that time, you said most of the coaches were still here. But what was it that you got back and you were not necessarily caught by surprise, but for sure didn't think that was going to be at the top of the priority list when you came back? What were some of the things that you had to navigate to ensure that the way in which success maybe felt the last time had shifted?
Right. Well, I think that the biggest thing as an athletic director is getting your coaches to do the things they have to do, right? And those aren't necessarily the things that are going to allow them to have success as a coach, from a wins and losses standpoint, but it's all the stuff behind the scenes, right? It's the communication, it's the organization, it's the making sure they're filling out the paperwork they need to fill out, making sure they're submitting rosters, doing all the administrative stuff, And so when I came back in 17, my focus is really on helping the coaches do the things they have to do. Because at the end of the day, in a public high school, the number of wins and losses is not going to be the thing that's going to keep your job or, going to allow you to lose your job. It's the paperwork stuff. It's the admin stuff. 9 times out of 10, if a coach doesn't do it, it's going to get them in hot water, And so many of our coaches, even some of our longest tenured coaches, a lot of that stuff still wasn't happening, And so, I was surprised that I was still having to provide the framework for, the things that needed to be done in a timely manner to many of my coaches. Some of them have been coaching here, going back to 1992, And so really providing an organizational framework so that my coaches can coach, but also do the important administrative things that have to be done. And like I said, from rostering kids to communication, to grade reports, to filling out your CCS forms for the playoffs. I mean, stuff like that, which is like I was having to do it all here, and that was a little bit of a surprise. And so I think I feel like my strongest attribute as a AD is really my ability to organize many complex tasks, break them down, have deadlines, internal deadlines, and just making sure the things that need to happen are happening and they're happening on time, And so the other part is the communication piece. So we didn't really have a formal way for our coaches to communicate with their kids and their parents. But I found like one of the things that almost every single parent and kid had used, a communication tool, was this Team Snap thing, which I had no idea what it was. But I guess if you played any amount of youth sports, any kind of youth sports in our community, these parents were using this Team Snap thing. So I got all our coaches on board with using that. It was great because I'd fill it out, I'd enter their emails, and then like all their accounts were already set up. And so instantly they'd get connected. They had a communication platform that they knew how to work, train my coaches how to use it. But I mean, I think that's the biggest part is, providing a platform that makes it easy for my coaches to communicate with their athletes and with their parents. And it's an internal communication tool, meaning only our teams have access to that information being shared, you know? So it's not a public forum, and that makes it a lot easier to make the communication meaningful without being completely out in the public eye, you know?
Yeah. For sure. And what would you say, having seen this from so many angles now as a coach yourself at the varsity and sub-varsity levels, as an AD at multiple sites or assistant AD at multiple sites, what could you offer as a general list of the things that outweigh wins and losses that make for successful coaches and experiences for athletes, right? Like, hey, good, look, we all want to win games.
Right.
And at the same time, these are the things that no matter what sport you're coaching, no matter what level you're coaching, this is where your energy needs to go in order to provide a fulfilling opportunity for our athletes.
Right. Right. One of the, just to back up a little bit, I think in 17, I really came in after speaking with the administration here with a vision that we really want, like we have great participation in athletics here, but we realized like there's a lot of kids that aren't participating that would otherwise be participating if we didn't, if we just change a couple of things. And so wanting to make our programs as inclusive as possible, I think is the biggest thing. And so really focused on my coaches making sure that they're focused on their lower levels, right? And developing their lower levels and having the coaching staff, having the resources available to pay lower level coaching staffs, filling those levels out and then getting the kids to participate. And so we started fielding freshman teams and other sports that we normally hadn't fielded in the past. So increasing participation across the board, We're a school of 2,100 kids. We have 1,100 kids that participate in athletics, which is tremendous, So I would say, number one, trying to provide as many opportunities as possible for kids to be able to participate. And I think having freshman level competition is a great way to do that. But that's difficult when you have like a basketball team, right? Where you're really limited to the number of kids you can have on a bench for any game, And so it's definitely been a fine line. I think the other thing too is really focusing on the relationships that our coaches have with their kids. Okay. Kids are very different than they were when I first started coaching, And so, our coaches need to be cognizant of the fact that our kids have a pretty good understanding of what's going on. And you're going to get a lot more questions of why, like, why do we do this? Why do we do the things that we do? And so particularly with my, longer tenured coaches, working with them to explain like, look, we need to change the way we go about communicating with our kids. Like just telling them they have to do something because, that's the way it has to be done. That doesn't cut it anymore. Like we have to be prepared to tell the kids and the parents why we do the things that we do, and that was tough for a lot of my coaches, is the why part, and then through that self-reflection. So I made all of my coaches kind of go through the self-reflection of think about the why and the things that you do. And through that process, a lot of coaches figured, hey, there's a lot of things I'm doing that we don't have to do or that we can change, And so I think getting my coaches to reflect on the why has been really good, but also, just increasing the amount of communication across the board. I mean, I touched on that briefly, but also like how you communicate with your athletes in practice, and the things that you say. And, I was often guilty of this as a coach, as an area for growth for me is it's not what you say, it's how you say it, and that's a really tough thing for someone to fix because we are who we are. Right. We talk the way that we talk, we communicate the way that we communicate, we use the tones that we use. And so, really, having an understanding of the way that we say things and the way that we communicate our messages is really important to kind of overall team unity and getting kids to buy in, getting parents to buy in, because we still have to do that. I'm very lucky that, our programs are successful. Many of our programs are very successful across the board in many sports, But our coaches still have to sell themselves. They have to sell their programs to their kids and to their parents to get them to buy in. Um, in a community like Los Gatos, specific to our school, like our parents and kids want to do everything, you know, they want to be able to do it all. And the hardest conversation to have with a kid or a parent is telling them you don't get to do that. You don't get to participate on this team and be in the band and have these private tutoring lessons at this time and go to Switzerland for the weekend and all this kind of stuff. You're going to have to make some choices and you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Now, the last thing I would want to do as an AD is make a kid choose like one thing over another. But at the end of the day, the kids have to be here to practice, right? They have to be here to compete. And so I think that's another thing is, you know, letting my coaches know, like at the same time we're working on what we're saying and how we're saying it, also telling them like, it's okay to tell them like, you can't do it all, kid. Like you're going to have to make some tough decisions. The key to that is communicating that as far in advance as possible. Like before tryouts begin, you're in summer or you're in spring, whatever it is, like communicating like, look, this is the requirements for participation in this program. Mm-hmm. You know, this is my expectation for my kids. This is what I need you as an athlete to do. This is what I need you as a parent to do and be available to do, you know? And so I think that's another key part. And it's still a battle that I fight almost on a daily basis here, you know? And, you know, it sucks when I look at a kid and I see the disappointment in their face when I have to say the word no, you know, and I'm lucky enough that that's not something I have to do a lot. I work really hard and my coaches work really hard to make sure our kids can do the things that they want to do. But sometimes, you know, tough decisions do have to be made. So,
yep. No, absolutely. So coach, how do you then balance the no, you have to make a choice with the power of a kid that is multifaceted and you do want multiple sport athletes, you want kids that are involved in community. How do you balance that, at least in the early years, right, when they're at the sub-varsity level, so they can kind of figure out their path?
Right.
How do you do that in a way that is inclusive of not just the athletics program, but some of these other things as well that these kids are interested in?
Right. I think there's two things to that. I think number one, I do ask all of my coaches to post all of their practices for the entire season, you know, on our communication platform. So that essentially, you know, whether it's a tryout sport or, you know, or an open sport, that every single practice date and time is written down, is at a place where people can go and look. You know, they know, hey, I'm expected to be here on this day. When there's holidays, I know practice is going to be at this time, you know? And so that way, so eliminating the surprise on that end, telling my coaches essentially like, whatever you go with as your practice times, do not deviate from that. Like, I understand like changes kind of happen at the last second, but whatever you decide your practice times are going to be, you need to do everything you can to stick to those times through the entire year. Because it's not fair to the kids when you say, hey, we're going to practice at this time on this day, and then you change it on in the last minute, because they're planning their day around you, you know? And so understanding the response, that helping my coaches understand they have a responsibility, because people are doing what you ask them to do. They are planning their lives around your practices. And so, you know, we can't be moving those at the last minute, you know? So I think being very clear about what the expectation is for their time and when and where they need to be is the first half of that. The second part of that is really examining why, you know, what we ask of our kids and their time. Okay. A lot of practices when I first got here were like 3 hours long, you know? And I'm like, why are we practicing for 3 hours, people? Why are we doing this? Like, why is that necessary? Can you not accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in 90 minutes or 2 hours, you know?
Bingo.
So, what I found was, my coaches almost needed permission, like needed to hear from me, like, hey, it's okay to shorten your practices. Just because you can practice this amount of time doesn't mean you need to. Let's get more out of our kids with less practice time, you know? And a lot of my coaches have really embraced that, where many of our practices don't exceed 2 hours for the most part, you know? And some teams don't even practice every day. they give them a day off during the week, and for our kids who are so overscheduled, like I can't tell you the amount of positive feedback that I receive from kids and parents being like, it's so great that, practices are shortened or my kid has this day off. And so, um, examining our own practices, right. And being like, how can we shorten the amount of time we need these kids here so that they can go and do other things, And so I think that's been really beneficial. Most of our football practices don't go more than 2 hours. Wrestling practices doesn't go more than 2 hours. Some of our practices, they're 90 minutes and our coaches are able to get done what they can get done. But the point being is like, it was really interesting because it's like my coaches just needed permission to do that. Like they just thought like they had to practice that long. And when I told them they didn't have to, it was like, oh, well, then we'll do this instead. And so I think that's been an important part of it. I think that old school mentality was we're going to practice for this amount of time. And, and just in this day and age, I don't think that's necessary. Obviously practice is important. You have to do it as much as you can, but we need to get the most out of the time that we do have. The third part of that, making sure my coaches have practice plans for every single practice. And that's how you maximize the time that you have with your kids. Right. And I know that seems so like, yeah, obvious, but I can't tell you the number of coaches who would go into practice and doesn't have a practice plan. Like, what are you doing today? What do you want to get accomplished? What are your goals? Right. And so really, really like fundamental stuff like that on the surface, like was really easy to implement and get my coaches to do. And, the results have been pretty good,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's really important that you noticed or you noted that giving them permission to practice less was the barrier.
Right.
Because often, right, we grew up in the same era. It's just like, this is what you do. And we were practicing for 3 hours a day, in the early 2000s. And now, like, if I go past 90 minutes as a coach, like I'm overtime. Like right. My guys know we're coming in for this much time. Maybe in the first 3 weeks of the season, it's 2 hours. But then after that, it's like NBA load management, right. And like, how do you do that in a way that you can articulate we're just as efficient because we go less? And I think that's important for people to hear, right? The idea of, hey, if I practice for an hour long, it's going to translate to this much more success is not accurate. It's like, how do you all, and we don't have the data, but if we did, it would be like, look, here's what we can show you.
You definitely hit a point where it's diminishing returns without a question, And Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, and as a coach is recognizing like, when have I lost these guys? When have I gone too long? And hey, it's okay to throw this period out, or, we're not going to do this today or whatever. It's like that's okay. But having a plan written down before every practice is key. And just trying to maximize what you want to get done in the least amount of time possible. You know?
Let me ask one more question before we wrap up, since we've been going for a while here. What have you seen as the athletic director or just as an observing coach that has been the best use of cross-discipline approach? Meaning, like, you're a wrestling and football coach, but you're out at tennis practice and you saw X, which you realize, hey, you know what? The football team needs to be doing this, right? Or some other variation of that you can put your finger on. Because I often feel like we get tunnel vision as a coach, right? I'm constantly, from my assistant coaches, getting a bunch of basketball things. And it's like, yo, where else are you looking for information, right? Because a big part of leading a program or an athletic department really has nothing to do with the X's and O's. It has to do with the logistics of everything else. So what have you seen over the years where you've seen something repurposed directly from one sport to another in a successful way?
That's a tough one. I'm just thinking about that.
Take as long as you want. We can edit.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this goes along the lines of what you're looking for, but one of the things that I implemented when I got back here in 2017 was a full-time kind of strength and conditioning program, which we didn't have. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, really the only teams that were in the weight room every day were the football program, mm-hmm. And so meeting with my coaches and saying, you need to get your athletes in the weight room at least twice a week, you know? And so now we're at a point where all of our programs, including tennis, right, they're actually in the weight room at least 2 days a week. So, you know, giving those coaches the resources that they need to be able to do that. The other thing about having you know, we have she's not full time, but we have a staff member who's our strength and conditioning coach. She has a background in strength and conditioning. Is that I send my kids in the weight room for 50 minutes to an hour. I give my coach the gift of time, right? Because they don't have to be in the weight room doing that stuff. Now they're on campus, but they're doing the other administrative things that they need to do with their program. So I think that's been really helpful. But as far as like taking specific things from practices, I would say most of our practices, my coaches, they all kind of run practice the same way, right? Where it builds on itself, you know. But you know, I would say I have seen the baseball program as a good example kind of adopt the same format that the football program has when you have 3 levels practicing, how you get those teams to practice, when you get them to practice, when they're working together, you know, when they're not working together. You know, that's been really beneficial. We have limited field space here. So, and when we have as many programs as we have all going at the same time, you kind of got to get creative on when and where you're practicing, you know, to the point where, you know, during our crazy COVID season, I had football practice on the baseball field and I had baseball practice going on at the exact same time, you know? You know, I would say, you know, teaching the coaches or encouraging the coaches to share as much as possible.
Right.
But as far as like a specific, you know, skill to transfer over,
it's not even about that, Coach. What you shared already is great. It's more about when you go in as a wrestling coach and you're observing basketball practice or soccer, it's what are the outside the box ideas that would never occur to you to implement. So I asked the football team the other day, it was like, when's the last time you started practice just playing live 11 on 11? They would never do that. Right. And it's like, I asked the volleyball coach the same thing. When's the last time you just scrimmaged right off the bat, 6 on 6? You mean after warmups? No, I mean like right away, like as the first thing you do. Right. And it's not a right or a wrong. It's just me asking questions in regards to, hey, how do you do things a little bit differently to keep attention because we're dealing with a different kid,
right?
To keep enthusiasm because kids want to play games, right? And to do things in a way in which you would probably never think of if you've only coached volleyball your whole life.
Right. Well, I think you've given me a good new challenge to focus on. I can tell you that. So, because I haven't really looked at it with that critical of an eye as far as like, you know, how can our programs benefit from one another and implement the things that they're doing, because we, like, as you know, we have many programs that have success across the board, but I would say that information is definitely siloed.
Yes. You know? Oh, that's the big reason I asked the question, right? It's like, as coaches and athletes, we have tunnel vision. So how do we get out, especially when you have multi-sport athletes who are having a different experience on one team that they love and having a challenging experience on a different team, but they love the sport.
Right.
How do you bring those together and share ideas that are cross-disciplinary?
Right. I think, yeah, I mean, I think you've given me a great new project to think about, because I think, you know, we have a lot of expertise here across all the different programs that we have. And so encouraging our coaches to share that information with one another, I think is great. You know, this hasn't occurred to me, but it's like, we're at a place now with my coaching staff where, you know, we used to have everyone had their own little kingdoms around here, you know, and over time, as coaches have left and new coaches have come in, a lot of that is disappeared, which has been great, you know? And so, you know, the idea of getting my coaches together and talking about what are best practices, I think probably be a really fruitful exercise, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's a great idea.
All right. Well, let's stop there. We'll circle back for round two, maybe at one of our conferences that we're going to. But I think what I want to end with here is your second time through this, you joined all of these support organizations. And for people that don't know what those are, right, we have our league athletic directors council, then we have our section athletic director advisory board, then you have a state athletic director association, then you have a national one, right? And at the coaching level, those exist as well. But even if they don't, how do you build your own group of, I don't even say mentors, because it can be an equal level deal where you're just finding other people in a similar situation to bounce ideas off of. And I feel like there's this provincialism of, I don't want to share what we're doing, when ultimately it's like, I've never cared about that because they still got to stop you. So like, hey, what can I get from you? Hey, come to my practice, evaluate me, even though you're the rival school, right? How do you reassure coaches that there's more benefit in that,
right,
than keeping everything closed off?
Right. Well, I have an opportunity, you know, at least once a year, I get all my coaches together in one room. And so I think I have a great 20-minute exercise that I'm going to be kicking off my yearly coaches meeting with, where we really talk about sharing ideas and you know, getting that information out there. My coaches aren't afraid of sharing. I just need to provide the opportunity for them to do it, you know? So you definitely inspired me to do that. So,
well, glad I could do that. Glad that we had a conversation about these things, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. Thanks for coming on today. I know you got a busy schedule. I'm going to let you get back to it.
All right. Thanks for having me.